In the year 1812, the United States was barely a generation old. A fragile republic, born from revolution, and baptized in the fires of political ambition, expansionist dreams, and looming war. 13 original colonies had now become 17 states. New territories were being carved from wilderness and stitched into the patchwork of a growing nation. But the seams were still raw, untested. The ink on the Constitution had hardly dried, and already, the new American identity was being challenged from within, and from abroad. In the East, cities bustled with the politics of power. Heated debates raged in the halls of Congress, where men in powdered wigs spoke of liberty and law. But their words drifted no further than the stone buildings of Washington, because beyond the Allegheny Mountains, far past the reach of newspapers, government orders, and the safety of civilization, there was something else: wilderness, untamed, unforgiving, and full of secrets. This was the American frontier in 1812, a vast and shadowy realm of dense forests, rushing rivers, and endless silence. It was a place where legends still lived and men could vanish without a trace, where survival wasn't guaranteed, and where entire communities could be built or destroyed overnight. This was not a land of cities and parades. This was a land of howling wolves and crackling campfires, of rustling leaves that may or may not be stirred by human hands. To the east, there was government. To the west, there was mystery, and it was here, in a forgotten patch of shadowy forest land near what would one day become western Kentucky, that something extraordinary entered the world. There were no trumpets, no birth records, no witnesses, no names, just the wind and the trees. But something was watching. Some say it was fate, others believe it was nature's answer to mankind's growing greed, and a few, those who've walked these woods and heard things they couldn't explain, they whisper it was something else. A child, a creature, a force of the wilderness itself, born in silence beneath a canopy of stars. No one knew then, but this arrival would echo across generations. It would change lives. It would test science and faith, and it would expose the thin veil between the known and the unknowable. This is the story of the American frontier, not found in textbooks. A story lost in the woods and found in the minds of those brave enough to explore the forgotten corners of our history. This is not just a chapter of 1812. This is the edge of a nation. Stay with us as we journey deep into the forested soul of a young America, where the line between man and myth blurs, and history holds its breath, because in the frontier of 1812, not everything was what it seemed. In the spring of 1812, as the world around him burned in war and the frontier braced itself for bloodshed, a child was born, not in a palace, not in a city, but in a humble log cabin deep in the heart of the untamed American wilderness. His name was Timothy Caldwell, and his arrival would mark the beginning of something that defied logic and unsettled the hearts of everyone who crossed his path. The very month Timothy came into the world, American troops were setting fire to the Canadian town of York, and British forces were preparing to strike back, marching toward the nation's capital, ready to send a message. But in a small, isolated frontier village nestled at the edge of what is now western Pennsylvania, another kind of fire was being born, a silent, invisible fire that would haunt the land for decades to come. Mary Caldwell, a farmer's wife and a woman known for her strong constitution, gave birth to her son under a blood-orange moon. There was no cry, there was no scream, only silence. And eyes that opened wide the moment he entered this world, glowing faintly with a pale gray light, like mist caught in moonlight. The village midwife fainted at the sight. The preacher, who had just arrived to bless the child, dropped his Bible and muttered one word: "Omen." But Silas Caldwell, Timothy's father, dismissed the fear. A former soldier from the Revolution and a hard man shaped by years of war and farming, He refused to believe in superstition. He held his son for the first time and declared with quiet pride, "He's just like any other boy." But he wasn't, and deep down, everyone knew it. Timothy never cried. He never spoke a single word, not as a baby, not as a toddler, not even as the years passed and the other children learned to talk and laugh and shout. But Timothy understood everything. You could tell him to fetch wood, and he would bring exactly what you needed. You could whisper a secret across the room, and he would glance at you knowingly. And he never learned to walk, because he never needed to. By 9 months old, he was running through the trees, darting like a shadow between trunks and bushes, faster than any child had a right to move. The townspeople swore they saw him vanish into the woods for hours, sometimes days, only to return with strange artifacts in his tiny hands, charcoal sketches of underground cave systems no one had ever explored, feathers from birds that didn't exist in the region, and sometimes bones. Not animal. Too small, too human. He never laughed. He never cried. He never aged the way other children did. One morning, his mother found him standing barefoot in the cornfield just before dawn. The crows had gathered around him, dozens, silent and still, watching him. As if waiting for a command, and when she called to him, he turned slowly, eyes wide, mouth closed, and every single crow took flight at once. Only wind. The whispers in the village grew louder. Witch-born. Touched by spirits. Not of this world. Some claimed he was the product of something unnatural, that his mother had made a pact in the forest under the moonlight. Others said he was a warning, that something was coming. Then came the lightning storm. July, 1819. The sky cracked open for 3 days straight. Trees split in two. The river flooded, and fires swept through the forest. But Timothy, only 7 years old, stood at the edge of the village, watching the chaos with calm eyes that glowed brighter than they ever had before. When the storm ended, he disappeared, vanished without a trace. No footprints. No broken branches. No note. Only a map carved into the wood wall of the Caldwell cabin. A map no one recognized, until decades later, in 1867, during a coal mining expedition, that exact pattern of caverns was discovered under the Allegheny Mountains, a system of tunnels far older than any settler memory. With markings on the walls, markings that matched Timothy's earliest drawings, symbols no one has ever deciphered. Even today, local legends speak of the gray-eyed boy in the woods. Hikers report a figure standing still at twilight. Children speak of dreams where a silent boy shows them ancient places no map has ever recorded. And deep underground, miners have claimed to hear soft footsteps and feel a presence watching from the dark. Some believe he died. Others think he still walks the caverns, still silent, still watching, still waiting. In the annals of American history, the War of 1812 is remembered for fire, for invasion, for the birth of a nation's identity. But hidden beneath the pages of war and diplomacy lies a different story, a whisper from the wilderness. A mystery that science couldn't explain. A child born in fire and silence. Timothy Caldwell. The boy the frontier couldn't forget. If you listen closely, the forest still remembers. The year is 1812, a time when the United States was still forging its identity, when the wilderness stretched out wild and unbroken, and the frontier was more than just a place, it was a mystery. But hidden deep in the Appalachian hills of Kentucky, beyond the borders of civilization, lived a boy the world was never meant to understand. A boy who never spoke a word, but whose story still echoes through time. This is the haunting, true tale of Timothy Caldwell, the boy science couldn't explain, and the 1830 expedition that brought his impossible existence into the pages of history. 1. The frontier in 1812, a land untouched. Imagine it. The year is 1812. The American frontier was not the land of bustling towns and wagon trails we see in movies. It was a raw, primal expanse. Endless forests, uncharted rivers, and ancient mountains that had never known the sound of an axe. Settlers pushed westward, carving lives from wilderness. Conflicts simmered between new Americans and indigenous peoples. Every shadow in the trees whispered of danger, and discovery. In this wild and uncertain world, nature reigned supreme. Lightning storms rolled across the plains like gods. Diseases swept through towns with no warning. The land was both a promise and a threat. And the people who survived here, they were a breed apart. It was during this chaotic time that a child named Timothy was born, the strange boy of Kentucky in the foothills of what is now eastern Kentucky. The Caldwell family lived far from any main road, deep in the heart of the wilds. Timothy Caldwell, their youngest, was born in 1812, beneath a night sky so black it swallowed the stars. From the beginning, Timothy was different. He did not cry as a baby. He didn't babble. He never uttered a word, not to his parents, not to his siblings, not to the preacher who came once a year. But what he lacked in speech, he made up for in something unnatural. By age 6, Timothy was found writing on tree trunks with sticks of charcoal, strange symbols, spirals, glyphs that no one could read. At 8, he wrote in perfect Latin, though no one had taught him. At 10, he understood Cherokee symbols, despite never meeting a Cherokee speaker. And then, he began using a script that has never been identified, even to this day. The animals around the farm acted strangely near him. Birds followed him. Stray dogs sat by his feet. Snakes did not bite when they coiled around his legs. The townsfolk began whispering. "He speaks to the wind," they said. "That boy ain't natural." The 1830 expedition, Science Meets the Unexplainable. 1830, the American Philosophical Society in Philadelphia, a prestigious institution of scholars, thinkers, and naturalists, launched an expedition into the frontier. Their goal: to document the unstudied world. Plants, languages, people, diseases. Everything unknown. Among them was a young naturalist, just 24 years old, Dr. Elias Monroe. Bright, curious, and already obsessed with the strange tales that came from Kentucky's hills. He had heard one story that wouldn't leave his mind. A boy who speaks no language yet writes all of them. He had to see it for himself. The journey to the Caldwell homestead took weeks, across rivers, through thickets, across trails barely wide enough for a horse. And when Monroe arrived, what he saw shattered his understanding of the natural world. Observations of Dr. Monroe. Timothy was 18 years old. But Monroe wrote in his journal, "He looks no older than 12. His eyes reflect no light, like a mirror made of night." He observed Timothy from a distance at first. The boy seemed aware of Monroe's presence, always watching, but never afraid. Monroe tried to approach him with kindness, with science, with logic. He recorded these observations: body temperature, lower than average, unnaturally so. Healing, a small cut on his arm sealed itself in under an hour. Skin, cold to the touch. Smooth, almost too smooth. Eyes, black mirrors. They absorbed light rather than reflected it. Timothy never spoke. But he wrote. He filled pages with symbols from across civilizations: Egyptian, Greek, Cherokee, Hebrew, and that strange unknown script no scholar has ever deciphered. Even more unsettling was his effect on nature. Wolves came near, and did not attack. Birds landed on his shoulders. When he walked into a clearing, even the wind seemed to hush. Monroe wrote in his private journal, "He carries with him a calm that defies explanation. Not peace, not silence, but a stillness that feels otherworldly. As though the earth pauses to hear him think. The mystery that haunts Histor. Monroe stayed with the Caldwells for 11 days. On the last night, Monroe claimed he awoke to a strange humming sound. When he stepped outside, he saw Timothy, standing in the field, arms outstretched, whispering in a voice that sounded like wine through trees. The stars that night were brighter than any Monroe had ever seen. When he returned to Philadelphia, Monroe tried to publish his findings, but was ridiculed. His peers dismissed the story as fantasy, frontier madness, hallucination. But his journal remains, preserved in the archives of the American Philosophical Society, hidden deep in the basement, in a folder labeled only Subject 18T. No one knows what became of Timothy Caldwell. Some say he vanished into the forest. Some say he never existed at all. But others claim he still walks the ridgelines of Kentucky, ageless, speechless, eternal, speaking to the birds, the trees, and the wind. Studio microphone OUTRO. The frontier of 1812 was a place of mystery, danger, and wild beauty. But even in a land filled with the unknown, one boy stood apart. Timothy Caldwell. A child of silence. A student of the wind. A living riddle science could never explain, and perhaps never should. In the early 19th century, the American frontier was a place of wonder, and terror. It was 1812. The United States was still young. The western frontier, untamed, mysterious, stretched like an open wound between civilization and chaos. Endless forests, winding rivers, unexplored trails. A land thick with secrets, whispered legends, and the raw power of nature. Life was hard. Danger was everywhere. But for the settlers who dared to cross into the unknown, it was also a place of hope, and sometimes things far stranger than hope. This is the story of Timothy Caldwell, a boy science couldn't explain. Cut to old parchment map of the Ohio River Valley. Fade in October 10th, 1832. It began on a night like no other. The people of the Ohio River Valley witnessed what they would forever call the sky fire. A meteor storm of such intensity that it turned the night into day. Bright, fiery streaks tore across the heavens. Some said it looked like stars falling in pain. Others claimed it was a sign, a warning from above. But for the Caldwell family, who lived deep in the woods along the valley, it was the night their world changed forever. Their youngest son, Timothy, was just 11 years old. Quiet, curious, unusually perceptive. That night, as the sky burned, Timothy stood outside the cabin, barefoot in the grass, staring upward, and then he vanished. No sound. No scream. No sign of struggle. Just gone. Frantic voices, lanterns in the dark, villagers with dogs and torches. The search lasted for weeks. Neighbors scoured the hills, the forests, the frozen streams. Days turned to nights. Weeks passed. Snow fell. No tracks. No clues. Just a boy lost to the wilderness. Or something darker. The village priest said it was the devil. The old Shawnee tracker said the forest took him. Hope faded. Grief settled over the Caldwell cabin like thick smoke. But then, exactly 3 months later, in the dead of winter, as a snowstorm howled through the trees, Timothy returned. Creaking door opens slowly. Snow blows in. A boy stands at the threshold. No coat. No shoes. Alive. He was barefoot, his skin pale as the snow, but unhurt. His eyes, wide, distant, like they'd seen something too big for words, and in his hand, he clutched a strange object. Not wood. Not stone. It shimmered faintly, metallic, smooth, and carved with glowing, alien symbols that pulsed like a heartbeat. He said nothing. Just walked into the cabin, placed the object on the family hearth, and stared into the fire. 4 hours, then days, then weeks. He barely ate, barely slept. But he was no longer the same. Seasons change rapidly, crops bloom in winter, animals multiply unnaturally. Soon after, impossible things began to happen. Crops that shouldn't grow in winter bloomed tall and full. Livestock gave birth at twice the normal rate. The once poor Caldwell farm became a place of eerie abundance, And Timothy began to change. His body aged faster than time allowed. Bones stretched, voice deepened, skin weathered. Within weeks, he no longer looked like a boy, but a young man, as if the years he missed were catching up with a vengeance. Doctors came from miles around. Priests. Scientists. None could explain it, until an old man named Monroe arrived. Monroe, tall, bent with age, steps from a horse-drawn cart. A scar over one eye. A book of symbols in hand. Monroe had studied strange occurrences across the continent. He'd heard whispers of ancient relics, celestial events, and children marked by forces not of this world. He saw the stone. Studied the symbols. Stared at Timothy's silent figure, still hypnotized by the hearth flames. And finally he spoke. "This is not a boy we can explain," Monroe said. "This is something beyond science." Dramatic montage, drawings of symbols, the meteor storm, strange plants growing, ancient native myths etched in rock. The artifact was removed. When it left the hearth, everything stopped. Crops withered. Animals died. And Timothy, now eerily still, finally spoke 6 words. "They are coming back for me." And that night, once more he vanished. This time, for good. To this day, no one knows what happened to Timothy Caldwell. Some say he was chosen by something ancient, a power from the stars. Others believe he slipped through time, returned only to warn, then left again to places our minds cannot reach. The object was hidden, buried, sealed in stone. But rumors say it still pulses faintly beneath the earth of the old Caldwell land. Waiting. For what? No one knows. This was the frontier in 1812. A land of mystery. Of myth. Of terror and wonder, where even time could break. And a boy named Timothy reminded us, the universe is far more strange than we will ever understand. The year is 1812. A young nation stands on the edge of war, its borders bleeding into untamed wilderness. But while most remember the War of 1812 as a battle for territory and honor, few remember the mystery that lay buried deep in the frontier, a mystery science would fail to explain for over half a century. This is the story of Timothy Caldwell, the boy science couldn't explain. Candlelit parchment maps of early America, zooming in on Kentucky, then panning westward into the frontier. In 1812, the American frontier was a place of promise and peril, a savage no-man's land beyond the Appalachian Mountains. It was the edge of civilization, a wild expanse crawling with danger, wild animals, hostile encounters, and things beyond comprehension. Out here, superstition was as real as survival. And it's here, in the shadow of war and wilderness, that a child named Timothy Caldwell appeared. No one knew where he came from. A fur trapper named Elijah Monroe claimed he found the boy wandering alone near the banks of the Ohio River, barefoot, clothes torn, clutching something strange in his hands, a smooth black stone, unlike anything anyone had ever seen. It shimmered in moonlight. It pulsed like it had a heartbeat. Scene changes to eerie reenactments. Foggy woods, a boy stumbling through trees holding the stone. Timothy couldn't speak. Not at first. But he was calm, eerily calm. His eyes were silver, almost glowing. Locals whispered. Some said he was cursed. Others thought he was a spirit. A few claimed he was a gift from God. But one thing was certain. Timothy Caldwell was not a normal child. Flash visuals of Native American petroglyphs, ancient symbols, glowing stones, journal entries as the War of 1812 exploded across the continent. Monroe raised Timothy in secret. Hidden from soldiers, scholars, and settlers. Monroe wrote extensively in a private journal, documenting strange behaviors. Timothy never got sick. Never aged like other children. He learned languages overnight. He could predict weather, animal migrations, even people's deaths. But most chilling was the stone. It glowed in his hands. It responded to his touch. And once, during a thunderstorm, It lifted several inches into the air and began to hum. Cut to black and white sketches and reenactments of early scientists. By 1825, Monroe vanished. Some say he was murdered. Others believe he simply disappeared. But Timothy, now appearing to be about 16 years old, was spotted again in Missouri, then Oregon, then nowhere. He became a myth. A ghost story told around campfires. But the whispers never stopped. Now cut to a new scene. Washington, D.C., 1867. Historical transition to post-Civil War America. Fast forward to 1867. The Civil War is over. A new scientific age begins. The Smithsonian Institution is born, and a wave of curiosity sweeps through the land. Researchers revisit old legends, and someone uncovers Monroe's journal. The name Timothy Caldwell surfaces again. A relic from the past. A team is dispatched. Shockingly, they find him. Slow zoom on old black and white photo of a frail man with glowing eyes, seated alone in a cabin. He was living alone in the Colorado frontier. 55 years old, but looking well over 90. His silver eyes were still there. His memory, gone. His surroundings, bizarre. The cabin was filled with unknown artifacts, symbols, and mechanical devices that defied explanation, and the stone, still glowing. Smithsonian scientists ran every test imaginable. But the results were terrifying. His DNA did not match known human structures. His blood contained elements that weren't even discovered yet. His handwriting, a perfect match to Egyptian scrolls that hadn't been unearthed until decades after Monroe's journal. And the stone? Neither metal nor mineral. A composition science couldn't categorize. Was he an experiment? An alien? A prophet? No one knew. And Caldwell said nothing. Timothy Caldwell died in the winter of 1868. Quietly. Alone. He was buried by his remaining relatives in a small unmarked grave beneath a wooden cross. But 3 days later, everything was gone. Not just the body, not just the coffin, the entire grave. The ground was untouched. No soil disturbed. Just grass, and the stone vanished. Of an aged, weathered journal page, the final entry, only one thing remained. Elijah Monroe's final journal entry, now locked deep in the Smithsonian archives. It read: If Timothy Caldwell was human, then our science is blind. If he was not, then we are not alone. The frontier in 1812 was not just a place of war and wilderness, but a gateway to something far stranger. In the year 1812, the American frontier was wild, raw, and untamed. Kentucky was still young, barely 2 decades old since becoming the 15th state in the Union. The land was vast and unpredictable, filled with thick forests, winding rivers, and dangers both seen and unseen. It was a place where law was a whispered idea, not an established fact. A place where settlers carved out lives between the howl of wolves and the silence of unknown things watching in the dark. Native nations fought to hold on to their lands. Colonists struggled to survive in isolation. And far beyond the reach of city halls and governors, strange stories began to surface. Stories like that of Timothy Caldwell. Today, few know the name. He appears in no official records, no birth certificates, no schoolbooks. Ask any historian in Frankfurt or Lexington, and they'll likely shrug. Timothy Caldwell, they'll say, is just a tale, one of many whispered through the trees of rural Kentucky. But out in the deep woods, some still remember. Soft fade to a flickering candle in a log cabin. A shadow moves past the window. They say he appeared in the spring of 1812. No family, no possessions, no past. Just a boy, barely 10 years old, found alone near the Ohio River by a trapper named Elias Boone. The man claimed the boy spoke little English at first, but understood everything. Animals didn't fear him. Trees seemed to bend slightly as he passed. Elias would later swear he once saw the boy speak to a deer and that the deer nodded. Was it madness? A lonely frontiersman crafting stories out of loneliness? Or something more? Old hand-drawn maps of Kentucky, Native American lands, battlefront lines of the War of 1812. 1812 wasn't just the year of Timothy's arrival. It was the year of a great war, a war few modern Americans understand. The War of 1812 was fought between the United States and the British Empire, with Native American nations caught in the crossfire. On the frontier, battles were not fought with formations and flags, but with ambushes, raids, and desperate stands in the woods. Kentucky was on edge. Every settler feared British invasion from the north and uprisings from native alliances in the west. In this chaos, Timothy Caldwell grew, but remained a mystery. Seen, a shadowed figure walks through tall grass at dusk. Wolves howl nearby. Elias Boone's journal, discovered in the ruins of an old cabin near Bardstown, mentions Timothy again and again. He writes, "The boy don't sleep like others. Walks the woods at night. The dogs follow him. The wolves too." One night, Boone claimed a group of Shawnee warriors surrounded the cabin. But before any blood was shed, Timothy stepped outside, placed a hand on the earth, and whispered. Boone swore the wind howled unnaturally and the warriors lowered their weapons and simply walked away. Fantasy? Folklore? Perhaps. But nearby tribes told their own stories, of a star child, who could command beasts and silence war. Some believed he was sent by the spirits. Others, that he wasn't human at all. Dark forest with lightning crackling overhead. A boy's silhouette appears briefly among trees. And then, just as suddenly as he arrived, he vanished. By 1820, Elias Boone was found dead, his journal soaked in rain, lying beside his body. No sign of Timothy remained. No one ever saw the boy again. But the land remembered. To this day, some hunters, campers, and wanderers claim strange happenings along the Ohio River. They speak of footprints in mud that lead nowhere, of trees that seem to hum, of wolves with knowing eyes watching from the shadows, and of a whisper, barely audible on stormy nights. Timothy. They say if you walk those woods when the moon is high and thunder rolls in the distance, you might just feel him nearby, not a ghost, not a legend, but a reminder that the frontier was never just a battle for territory. It was a borderline between the known and the unknowable. Was Timothy Caldwell a miracle of nature? A visitor from beyond? Or a story born from war, loneliness, and the eerie quiet of the forest? We may never know. And maybe we're not supposed to, because history is not always what it seems. If this story gave you chills or opened your mind to the unknown, don't forget to like, subscribe, and drop a comment below. What do you think Timothy Caldwell really was? A boy touched by the divine, a being from the stars? Or just another mystery the trees refuse to give up? Thanks for watching. Stay curious. Stay brave. And as always, keep seeking the untold.